Hi, my name is Audra Edwards, and I'm here today to talk to you about my dissertation research for this week on the field of U.S. relations with Latin America. So I actually looked at two dissertations this week. The first one was U.S. imperial relations with Latin America, and the second was called Remediating Empire. In the U.S. imperial relations with Latin America, the author discusses how free trade and the militarization of right-wing groups was used to create and maintain an informal empire of the United States in Latin America. And the second one is more focused and examines the three waves of propaganda regarding U.S. Puerto Rican citizenship and how it reflects the larger relationship. So our first one, the U.S. Imperial Relations, was written by Cooper, and Cooper really draws upon mostly the work of other scholars, such as the two articles on the theoretical framework that he wants to use, and on policies and military actions that happened in the past. Whereas Corbello, who talks about the citizenship topic, looks at political cartoons and other popular media to draw her conclusions from, as well as documentary photography and visual and written texts. The methods of Cooper and Corbello are also a little bit different. Cooper examines the relationship of the United States and Latin America through this theoretical framework that two other scholars have created, and he uses the authors of the Imperialism of Free Trade article and the Dependent State Formation and Third World Militarization article to frame his entire argument. And he begins his research by explaining the theoretical approaches that were present in these articles, as well as the policies and actions that defined the relationship in general. He wraps up his article with an examination of the Cold War relationship between the U.S. and Latin America as well. Corbello, on the other hand, takes in general a Foucauldian approach to her topic and uses critical discourse analysis as well. She begins her dissertation with the historical background of the region and its relationship to the United States, talking about the Monroe Doctrine, etc. And she talks about the colonial governance and the development of identity within the area. And then she discusses the changes to the rhetoric of imperialism that was reflected in these different forms of propaganda, talking about U.S. citizenship being given to Puerto Ricans and how it was discussed and portrayed in media, which is really interesting. The content was also slightly different between the two. For Cooper, there's an explanation of the theoretical approaches to empire that is a really dominant theme throughout the entire piece, as well as the analysis of policies that the United States used to justify the military interventions. Cooper's area is a little bit more done than Corbello's area. Corbello, on the other hand, explains this concept of critical discourse analysis and how it is useful to her and useful in looking at this media. And she also includes an examination of how the U.S. portrayed the assumption of Puerto Rican territory, or the territory of Puerto Rico, into the United States. She proceeds with an analysis of Puerto Rican citizenship while it was still an insular territory, and then wraps up after World War I, whenever Puerto Rico is part of the U.S.'s informal empire and technically a territory or free state. The conclusions are also a little different. Cooper concludes that imperialism evolved from this more direct enterprise into an indirect system that was maintained through the free market and the militarization of right-wing groups. Corbello is going to conclude that the changing American view of U.S. citizenship in Puerto Rico and its empire in general have been preserved in multiple forms of media, and you can see these reflecting the bigger picture between the Spanish-American War to the end of World War II. And this is my bibliography.